What if I told you that Persia never truly disappeared from history? That the civilization many people believe vanished thousands of years ago still exists today, simply under another name? At first glance, it may sound like a historical curiosity, but behind this transformation lies a story filled with ambition, conquest, cultural resilience, and political decisions that reshaped how an entire civilization would present itself to the world. Why would a nation with one of the longest continuous histories on Earth choose to abandon the name by which the world had known it for centuries? Why, in the middle of the 20th century, did Persia suddenly become Iran? To answer that question, we must travel through more than 3,000 years of history. We will witness the rise of empires that once ruled half the known world, invasions that shattered dynasties, and cultural transformations that forever altered the identity of an ancient people. Because this is not simply the story of a name change. It is the story of how power, religion, diplomacy, and national identity can reshape the memory of an entire civilization. So sit back and imagine a land surrounded by towering mountain ranges, vast deserts that stretch beyond the horizon, and trade routes that connected distant worlds long before modern globalization ever existed. Across these routes flowed more than silk, spices, and precious metals. Ideas traveled, languages evolved, religions spread, and identities were forged. This land is the Iranian Plateau, a region that has served for thousands of years as one of the great crossroads of human civilization. But how did it all begin? To understand that, we must travel back more than 3,000 years, to a time when the foundations of what we now call Iran were only beginning to take shape. Around the second millennium before Christ, groups of people known today as the Indo-Iranians began migrating into this region. They were nomadic tribes, skilled horse riders who moved across vast landscapes with their herds and families. Their arrival would slowly transform the cultural and political map of the plateau. These people spoke languages that belonged to the Indo-European family, the same linguistic family that would eventually give birth to languages like Greek, Latin, Spanish, Portuguese, and many others across Europe and Asia. This detail is important because many people today mistakenly associate Iran with Arabic culture and language. But historically, the roots of Iranian civilization are entirely different. The early Persian languages were related not to Arabic, but to ancient Indo-European tongues. For example, the Old Persian word for mother was mater, and the word for father was peder. Even today, echoes of these ancient sounds remain in modern Persian. These were not merely words. They were fragments of a cultural identity that would survive for thousands of years. Among the Indo-Iranian tribes that settled across the plateau, two groups would become particularly influential: the Medes and the Persians. The Medes established themselves in the northwest of the region. Over time, they built strong political structures and developed a powerful kingdom that dominated much of the surrounding territory. For generations, the Medes were the true center of power in the region. The Persians, on the other hand, settled farther south in a region known as Pars, a fertile land located near the Persian Gulf. From the name Pars would eventually emerge the word Persia. At first, however, the Persians were not especially powerful. They were simply one tribe among many, living under the shadow of the more dominant Median kingdom. No one at the time could have imagined that this relatively minor group would one day create one of the greatest empires the world had ever seen. But history often changes direction because of a single individual. And in this case, that individual was a man whose name would echo across centuries: Kurosh, known to history as Cyrus the Great. Cyrus was born into the Persian royal family during a time when the Persians were still subordinate to the Median Empire. But he possessed something that few leaders in history have ever truly mastered: the ability to unite divided peoples under a shared vision. Around the year 550 before Christ, Cyrus launched a rebellion against the Medes. Instead of simply destroying their kingdom, he absorbed it. The Medes were not annihilated. They became partners in a new political order. With this act, Cyrus founded what historians now call the Achaemenid Empire, the first great Persian empire. And what made this empire remarkable was not only its size, but the philosophy that guided it. Most ancient empires ruled through fear. They imposed their gods, their language, and their culture upon conquered populations. Cyrus chose a different path. Rather than forcing uniformity, he allowed the diverse cultures of his empire to survive and even flourish. Temples were preserved. Local traditions were respected. Religious practices were tolerated. This strategy created something revolutionary for its time: loyalty instead of rebellion. One of the most famous examples occurred after Cyrus conquered Babylon in 539 BCE. Instead of destroying the city, he allowed the people to continue practicing their traditions. He even permitted the Jewish population, who had been exiled there by the Babylonians, to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple. To many of them, Cyrus was not a conqueror. He was a liberator. For the Babylonians, he presented himself not as an outsider, but as the chosen ruler of their own god Marduk. It was a masterful political strategy. Cyrus understood something many conquerors never learned. Power could be strengthened through respect. Under Cyrus and his successors, particularly Darius I, the Persian Empire expanded at an astonishing pace. Within a century, it stretched from the Indus River in the east to the shores of the Aegean Sea in the west. From Egypt in the south to the steppes of Central Asia in the north. Never before had such a vast territory been united under a single administration. Babylon, Lydia, Mesopotamia, all became provinces of a vast imperial structure. But the Persians did more than conquer land. They created systems that allowed such a massive empire to function. A network of royal roads connected thousands of kilometers of territory. Couriers carried messages across the empire with remarkable speed. Administrators governed provinces known as satrapies, ensuring that local populations remained integrated into the imperial system. It was not merely conquest, it was governance. Some historians even describe the Achaemenid Empire as the world's first true superpower. Yet the balance between cultural tolerance and centralized power was delicate. Empires built across vast territories are always vulnerable to forces that rise from beyond their borders. And eventually, that force appeared from the west. He was young, ambitious, and determined to accomplish something no ruler had ever attempted before. His name was Alexander. History would remember him as Alexander the Great. His official justification was revenge. In 334 BCE, Alexander led a relatively small but highly disciplined army across the Hellespont into Asia. For decades, the Greek world had fought against Persian influence. Alexander presented himself as the champion of Greek civilization. But his true ambition went far beyond revenge. He wanted glory, immortality in history, and perhaps even the conquest of the known world. What followed was a series of decisive battles that would forever change the balance of power in the ancient world. The first clash occurred at the Battle of Granicus. Then came Issus, and finally, the decisive confrontation at Gaugamela. Each battle pushed the Persian Empire closer to collapse. The Achaemenid kings, who had once ruled half the world, found themselves unable to stop the advance of a determined young conqueror. Eventually, the Persian capital cities fell one after another, and with them, the greatest empire of the ancient world came crashing down. Yet what happened next surprised even Alexander's own followers. He did not destroy Persia. He embraced it. Instead of ruling as a purely Macedonian conqueror, Alexander began adopting Persian customs. He wore Eastern robes. He participated in local ceremonies. He married Persian princesses, and he declared himself the legitimate successor of the Persian kings. To many of his Greek and Macedonian soldiers, this felt like betrayal. They had come to defeat Persia. Now their leader seemed to be becoming Persian himself. But Alexander had a different vision. He dreamed of creating a new world where East and West would merge into a single civilization, a universal empire, a fusion of cultures. Unfortunately, that dream would not last long. In the year 323 BCE, Alexander died suddenly in Babylon at the age of just 32. And with his death, the empire he had built began to fracture almost immediately. His generals divided the territory among themselves. But although the political structure of Alexander's empire collapsed, something deeper remained. Persia, not merely as a kingdom, but as a cultural identity, had survived. And it was only waiting for the right moment to rise again. Alexander's death left behind a power vacuum that shattered his dream of a unified empire. Without a clear successor, his generals, known to history as the Diadochi, divided his vast territories among themselves. The lands that once formed the heart of the Persian Empire fell largely under the control of the Seleucid dynasty, founded by Seleucus, one of Alexander's most capable commanders. At first, the Seleucids attempted to maintain Alexander's vision of a Hellenistic world. Greek culture spread across cities founded throughout the former Persian lands. Greek language became prominent in administration and trade. Temples, theaters, and marketplaces reflected the architectural style of the Mediterranean world. But beneath this surface of Hellenistic influence, something deeper remained unchanged. Persia had not disappeared. Its traditions, languages, and cultural memory continued to live among the people of the plateau. The Seleucid rulers, despite their ambitions, struggled to control such a vast and diverse territory. Over time, local powers began to reassert themselves, one of these rising forces would eventually challenge and replace Seleucid authority in the region. They were known as the Parthians. Originating from northeastern Iran, the Parthians were skilled horse archers whose military tactics made them formidable opponents. Their armies could strike quickly and retreat before enemy forces could respond. Over the course of the 3rd century BCE, the Parthians gradually expanded their influence until they controlled much of the Iranian plateau and surrounding regions. The Parthian Empire was different from the centralized structure of the Achaemenids. It operated more like a federation of powerful noble families and regional rulers who recognized the authority of a central king. This decentralized system allowed them to rule vast territories while maintaining local autonomy. But it also meant that the empire was often internally fragmented. Still, the Parthians played a crucial role in preserving and reviving Persian cultural identity. They stood between two powerful worlds, the Roman Empire in the west and the expanding civilizations of Central Asia in the east. For centuries, they acted as a buffer between Rome and the lands of the Iranian plateau, engaging in repeated wars with Roman legions. Roman generals would learn the hard way that conquering Persia was far more difficult than defeating Hellenistic kingdoms. The Parthians' mastery of cavalry warfare allowed them to defeat even experienced Roman armies. Yet despite their military strength, the Parthian state remained politically fragile. Power struggles among noble families weakened central authority. Eventually, another force rose from within Persia itself, a dynasty that would claim direct connection to the ancient kings of the Achaemenid Empire. They were the Sassanids. In the 3rd century CE, a leader named Ardashir I rebelled against Parthian rule and established a new empire centered in the region of Fars, the same homeland from which the original Persians had emerged centuries earlier. The Sassanid rulers openly presented themselves as heirs of the ancient Persian kings. They revived imperial symbolism. They promoted Persian language and traditions. And most importantly, they re-established Zoroastrianism as the official religion of the state. Zoroastrianism was one of the world's oldest monotheistic religions, centered around the worship of Ahura Mazda, the supreme god representing truth, light, and cosmic order. Under the Sassanids, Zoroastrian temples flourished, priesthoods gained influence, and religious identity became closely intertwined with imperial authority. The Sassanid Empire quickly became one of the great powers of the ancient world. In many ways, it represented a true revival of Persian imperial strength. From the Euphrates River to Central Asia, the Sassanids controlled territories that rivaled the earlier Achaemenid Empire in influence and prestige. But their greatest rival stood to the west, Rome, and later, the Eastern Roman Empire, known today as the Byzantine Empire. For centuries, the two superpowers fought a series of brutal wars across Mesopotamia, Armenia, and the Levant. These conflicts drained both empires of resources and stability. And while the Persians and Byzantines exhausted themselves in endless warfare, a new power was quietly rising to the south, in the deserts of the Arabian Peninsula. In the early 7th century, a religious movement began to spread among the Arab tribes. It was Islam. Within only a few decades after the death of the Prophet Muhammad, Arab armies expanded rapidly across the Middle East. their momentum was unstoppable. In a series of decisive battles during the 600s and 640s, Arab forces defeated the Sassanid armies and brought an end to the last great Persian empire of antiquity. The fall of the Sassanids marked one of the most dramatic turning points in Persian history. For the first time in more than 1,000 years, the Iranian plateau was ruled not by Persian kings, but by foreign conquerors. With the arrival of Islamic rule came profound transformations. Arabic became the dominant administrative and scholarly language. Islam gradually replaced Zoroastrianism as the primary religion of the region. Political authority shifted to the expanding Islamic caliphates. At first glance, it might seem that Persian identity was being erased, but history rarely moves in such simple ways. Instead of disappearing, Persian culture adapted. It absorbed the new religious and political realities while preserving its own traditions beneath the surface. Over time, the Persian language re-emerged, written using the Arabic script, but filled with its own vocabulary and literary traditions. Persian scholars became some of the most influential intellectuals of the Islamic world. Persian poets created masterpieces that are still celebrated today. Figures like Ferdowsi, whose epic poem the Shahnameh preserved the legendary history of ancient Persian kings, played a critical role in safeguarding cultural memory. The Shahnameh did more than tell stories. It reminded the Persian people of who they had been and who they still were. Even under Islamic rule, Persian identity continued to evolve rather than vanish. Throughout the centuries that followed, the Iranian plateau became a stage for new waves of conquest and political transformation. Turkic dynasties rose to power. Mongol armies under Genghis Khan swept across the region in the 13th century, leaving destruction in their wake. Later, the conqueror Timur, known in the West as Tamerlane, built his own empire across Persia and Central Asia. Each of these invasions reshaped the political landscape, but remarkably, Persian culture remained resilient. Languages changed. Rulers came and went. Empires collapsed. Yet the Persian cultural sphere endured. Over time, something even more significant began to take shape. A distinct Iranian identity that combined ancient Persian heritage with Islamic faith. This synthesis would eventually find its most powerful expression under a dynasty that transformed both the religious and political structure of the region. The Safavids, their rise in the early 16th century, would mark one of the most decisive moments in Iranian history, because the Safavid rulers did something that would permanently distinguish Iran from the rest of the Islamic world. They made Shia Islam the official religion of the state. And in doing so, they reshaped the identity of an entire nation. The rise of the Safavid dynasty marked a turning point that would permanently reshape the identity of the Iranian plateau. Until that moment, although Persian culture had survived centuries of conquest, the political landscape of the region remained fragmented. Various Turkic dynasties ruled different territories. Local warlords competed for influence, and religious divisions reflected the broader diversity of the Islamic world. But in the early 16th century, a new force emerged from the northwest of the region that would reunify much of the old Persian heartland under a single authority. The Safavids were not merely another royal family seeking power. Their origins lay in a religious movement. The Safavid order began as a Sufi brotherhood, founded centuries earlier by Sheikh Safi al-Din in the city of Ardabil. Over time, this spiritual order evolved into a powerful political force supported by devoted followers known as the Qizilbash, warriors whose loyalty combined religious fervor with military strength. In 1501, a young leader named Ismail, barely 14 years old, led these forces into battle. Against all odds, he defeated rival factions and proclaimed himself Shah of a newly unified Persian state. With that declaration, the Safavid Empire was born. Yet Ismail's ambitions went far beyond territorial control. He intended to reshape the religious identity of the region itself. Until that time, the majority of Muslims across the Iranian plateau had practiced Sunni Islam. The dominant branch followed throughout most of the Islamic world. Ismail made a radical decision. He declared Twelver Shia Islam the official religion of the state. This was not a minor theological adjustment. It was a revolutionary transformation. Shia Islam places special emphasis on the leadership of the 12 Imams, descendants of the Prophet Muhammad, through his cousin and son-in-law, Ali. Their authority, according to Shia belief, carries divine legitimacy. By promoting Shia Islam as the official faith, the Safavids created a religious identity that distinguished their empire from their powerful Sunni neighbors, particularly the Ottoman Empire to the west. The transition was not peaceful. Safavid rulers enforced this religious transformation through state policies, institutional reforms, and sometimes violent persecution of opposing groups. Sunni religious leaders were replaced. Shia clerics were invited from regions such as Lebanon and Iraq to help establish new theological institutions. Gradually, over generations, Shia Islam became deeply rooted in Iranian society. This transformation would shape the country's religious identity for centuries to come. But the Safavid era was not only about religion. It was also a remarkable period of cultural revival. Cities flourished. Architecture reached new heights of artistic brilliance. The Safavid capital of Isfahan became one of the most magnificent urban centers of the early modern world. Travelers who visited the city described wide boulevards, elegant bridges crossing the Zayandeh River, and grand mosques decorated with intricate blue tiles that shimmered beneath the desert sun. The famous Nakshi Jahan Square became one of the largest public squares ever built, surrounded by palaces, markets, and places of worship that reflected the artistic genius of Persian civilization. Persian poetry, philosophy, and science continued to thrive. Trade networks connected Iran with Europe, India, Central Asia, and the Ottoman world. Carpets, textiles, ceramics, and metalwork produced in Safavid workshops became highly prized commodities across continents. In many ways, the Safavid Empire represented a rebirth of Persian political and cultural identity. Yet during this same period, something interesting was happening with the way the country was known to the outside world. For centuries, foreigners had referred to the region as Persia. This name originated from the Greek word Persis, derived from the province of Pars or Fars, the original homeland of the ancient Persians. Greek historians such as Herodotus used the term Persia to describe the empire founded by Cyrus the Great, and the name spread throughout Europe. Over time, Persia became the standard international name for the country. But inside the region itself, people used a different term: Iran. The word Iran comes from the ancient term Aryanum, meaning land of the Aryans, or land of the noble people. This name had deep historical roots and appeared in ancient texts long before modern political states existed. For centuries, these two names existed side by side. Persia was the name used by outsiders. Iran was the name used by the inhabitants themselves. This dual identity persisted through the Safavid period and into the centuries that followed. After the Safavids declined in the 18th century, the region experienced periods of instability. Various dynasties rose and fell, including the Afsharids and later the Qajar dynasty. The Qajar rulers governed Iran throughout the 19th century, a time when European powers were expanding their influence across Asia. Russia and Britain both competed for strategic control in what historians now call the Great Game. Iran found itself caught between these rival empires. Despite maintaining formal independence, the country faced political pressure, economic concessions, and growing internal dissatisfaction. By the early 20th century, many Iranian intellectuals and reformers believed that the country needed dramatic modernization in order to survive in a rapidly changing world. It was in this atmosphere that a military officer named Reza Khan rose to prominence. In 1921, he led a coup that gradually consolidated power. A few years later, in 1925, he became the new monarch, establishing the Pahlavi dynasty and taking the title Reza Shah. Reza Shah had an ambitious vision for his country. He wanted to modernize Iran rapidly, strengthen central authority, and reduce foreign influence. Railways were built. New schools were opened. The army was reorganized. Administrative institutions were reformed. But modernization, in Reza Shah's view, also required reshaping how the nation presented itself to the world. For centuries, foreign governments had used the name Persia. To many Western observers, the word Persia evoked romantic images of ancient empires, exotic luxury, and Oriental mysticism. While these associations reflected admiration for Persian culture, they also carried stereotypes rooted in colonial-era perceptions of the Orient. Reza Shah wanted to break away from those outdated images. He wanted the country to be recognized as a modern nation-state rather than an exotic relic of ancient history. So in 1935, he made a decision that would change how the world referred to his country. He sent a formal diplomatic request to governments around the globe. From that point forward, he asked that the international community use the name Iran in official correspondence. It was a simple administrative request, but its symbolic significance was enormous. For the first time in centuries, the name used by the country's own people would become its official identity on the global stage. Not everyone welcomed the change. Some scholars and intellectuals argued that abandoning the name Persia meant losing a powerful connection to a glorious historical legacy. After all, the word Persia carried with it memories of Cyrus the Great, Darius, the Achaemenid Empire, and centuries of cultural achievements. To many in the West, Persia symbolized ancient grandeur and artistic refinement. Iran, by contrast, sounded unfamiliar. Even within the country, debates emerged about whether the new name fully represented the historical continuity of the civilization. Yet the change remained. International maps, diplomatic documents, and global media gradually adopted the name Iran. But history would soon place the country at the center of another dramatic transformation. Because only a few decades later, a revolution would erupt that would once again redefine Iran's political system and reshape how the world perceived it. And with that revolution, the contrast between the ancient memory of Persia and the modern reality of Iran would become more visible than ever before. The tensions that had been building within Iranian society throughout the 20th century finally reached a breaking point in the late 1970s. For decades, the Pahlavi monarchy had pursued an aggressive program of modernization and westernization. Under the rule of Mohammad Reza Shah, the son of Reza Shah, Iran experienced rapid economic development fueled largely by oil revenues. Cities expanded quickly, modern industries were established, universities grew, and new infrastructure projects transformed the urban landscape. To many observers abroad, Iran appeared to be becoming one of the most modern and powerful nations in the Middle East. But beneath this surface of progress, dissatisfaction was spreading. Many Iranians believed that the rapid modernization policies ignored traditional cultural and religious values. Others criticized the growing gap between rich and poor, as oil wealth seemed concentrated among elites connected to the monarchy. Political opposition was also suppressed by the state security apparatus, which created an atmosphere of fear among critics of the government. At the same time, religious leaders were gaining influence among segments of the population who felt alienated by the Shah's policies. Among these religious figures, one man would eventually become the central voice of opposition. His name was Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. Khomeini had been openly critical of the monarchy for years, accusing it of corruption, authoritarianism, and submission to Western powers. His speeches and writings spread widely, despite attempts by the government to silence him. Eventually, he was forced into exile, but distance did not diminish his influence. From abroad, Khomeini continued to inspire a growing movement that united diverse groups: religious conservatives, intellectuals, students, and ordinary citizens frustrated with the political system. By the late 1970s, protests began spreading across the country. What started as demonstrations soon turned into a nationwide uprising. In 1979, the monarchy collapsed. Mohammad Reza Shah left the country, and after centuries of monarchic rule in various forms, Iran entered a completely new political era. The Islamic Republic of Iran was established. Khomeini returned from exile and became the central figure of the new government. Under the new system, political authority was structured around a unique blend of republican institutions and religious leadership. While elections continued to exist, ultimate authority rested with the supreme leader, a position designed to ensure that the state would remain aligned with the principles of Shia Islamic governance. This transformation dramatically altered Iran's relationship with the outside world. The revolution was followed by a series of events that intensified tensions between Iran and Western nations. One of the most significant moments occurred later in 1979, when Iranian students seized the United States Embassy in Tehran, leading to a diplomatic crisis that lasted more than a year. Relations between Iran and the United States deteriorated sharply. In the years that followed, Iran also faced the devastating Iran-Iraq War during the 1980s, a conflict that lasted 8 years and caused immense destruction on both sides. These events reshaped global perceptions of the country. For many people outside the region, the name Iran began to be associated primarily with geopolitical tensions, sanctions, ideological conflicts, and regional power struggles. Yet this modern political image represents only one layer of a much deeper historical identity. Because beneath the headlines and international disputes lies a civilization whose cultural roots extend back thousands of years. The poetry of Hafez and Rumi, the epic legends of the Shahnameh, the architectural brilliance of cities like Isfahan and Shiraz, the philosophical and scientific traditions that once influenced the entire Islamic world. All of these belong to the long cultural continuum that earlier generations knew as Persia. Today, this duality still exists. In everyday life, Iranians continue to use the name Iran for their country, just as their ancestors did for centuries. But around the world, the word Persia still carries powerful cultural resonance. It evokes images of ancient empires, legendary kings, elaborate palaces, and refined artistic traditions. In museums, academic texts, and cultural discussions, the term Persian remains deeply connected to language, literature, art, and heritage. Persian carpets, Persian poetry, Persian miniature paintings, Persian cuisine. These expressions continue to preserve the memory of a civilization that predates modern political boundaries. So when we ask whether Persia disappeared, the answer becomes clear. It did not vanish. It transformed. The civilization that once ruled vast territories from the Indus River to the Mediterranean Sea did not simply collapse into oblivion. Instead, it adapted. It absorbed new religions, new rulers, and new political systems, while preserving a cultural core that has endured through centuries of change. Names changed, empires rose and fell, dynasties came and went. Yet the deeper identity of the Iranian plateau remained remarkably resilient. Persia became Iran, not because the past was erased, but because history continued to evolve. The ancient legacy lives on in language, culture, memory, and identity. And perhaps that is the most remarkable aspect of this story. Civilizations are not defined only by the names written on maps. They are defined by the people who carry their traditions forward through time, through invasions, through revolutions, through centuries of transformation. And in that sense, the story of Persia was never truly about a lost empire. It was about a civilization that refused to disappear, even when the world believed it had. Because sometimes, the greatest transformations in history are not the ones that destroy civilizations. They are the ones that quietly rename them. And the story of Persia becoming Iran is one of the most fascinating examples of that transformation in human history. Two names, one land, and thousands of years of history that continue to shape the present. So the next time you hear the name Iran, remember that behind it lies a civilization once known as Persia, a civilization that helped shape the ancient world and still carries its legacy into the future. History did not erase Persia. It simply wrote a new name across the same land.
The legacy of Persia continues to live through language, culture, memory, and identity.
And perhaps that is the most powerful reminder history can offer.
Civilizations do not disappear when their names change.
They continue through the people who remember them.
And the story of Persia becoming Iran is ultimately the story of a civilization that survived the passage of time. Because sometimes the greatest transformations in history are not the ones that destroy civilizations.
They are the ones that quietly rename them. And the story of Persia becoming Iran is one of the most fascinating examples of that transformation in human history.
Two names.
One land.
And thousands of years of history that continue to shape the present.
And in that sense, the story of Persia was never truly about a lost empire.
It was about a civilization that refused to disappear.
Even when the world believed it had.
Because sometimes the greatest transformations in history are not the ones that destroy civilizations.
They are the ones that quietly rename them.
And the story of Persia becoming Iran is one of the most fascinating examples of that transformation in human history.
Two names.
One land.
And thousands of years of history that continue to shape the present. History did not erase Persia. It simply wrote a new name across the same land.